Normalcy. It's the reason why everyone in the 80s had that haircut. You know the one. Normalcy. It's why, despite liking them, I made fun of Nickelback for over a decade. Normalcy. It's why there are 9 mainline Star Wars films. That shouldn't happen, but it's normal to make Star Wars films now. So, good luck. Normalcy, while on the surface, seems to depict a kind of socially acceptable behavior, in reality is a concept that's used as a cudgel against the self-expression of mass populations. If we are to evolve past our current tribalistic attitudes and structures and move into the future as a social society, we need to begin to reevaluate how we think of what's normal and the ways that we allow people to manipulate our perspectives. So, if you're ready to get a deeper sense of appreciation for your true self and take a first couple steps into the world of the future, the social future, then come along with me on this extended exploration of what's normal. Homo sapiens' modern-day world is composed of technological, legal, and social precedents which are necessary for keeping order. For about 400,000 years, as I understand, human beings existed, by and large, undifferentiated from the natural world around them. We hunted and gathered, and as this was a period of time that exists largely before recorded history, I personally know very little about it. Which brings us to the first of many ways that you are completely and totally abnormal. For the majority of human history, we have existed without mass media, without intercontinental travel, and without information technology that can tell us more about the world than we can imagine. This is not a normal state of being for most human beings. Nonetheless, let's humor some arguments about normalcy. From the standpoint of this argument, the ultimate accumulation of our thousands of years of mysterious and messy history are the standards of social responsibility and technological luxury that we experience in the 21st century. Everything from legal and moral precedents that tell us not to harm one another to the ubiquity of cars in car-centric cities have created a sense of standardization that we psychologically rely on. In this way, a great deal of potential stressors and challenges are mitigated by reliability. You may, for instance, feel much more comfortable going outside in an area that it is normally safe and secure. But if you are living in a society where you could be legally murdered, you might have more to think about before running out to complete your errands. I can not only appreciate social, legal, and technological standards, but will even go as far as to say that a handful of normalized characteristics and behaviors are essential for societies to flourish. So great job, normalcy. But in that case, what am I going on about? Let's talk about the sun. If I were to tell you that the sun is the center of our solar system, assuming that you're a reasonable person, we'd be able to agree on something for a change, something that hundreds of years of science can definitively prove. But when Copernicus first said it, this was not normal. Okay, for those unaware, way back during the ancient and medieval periods of our civilization, it was common to believe that Earth was the seat of creation and the place at which the entire universe revolved around. In other words, narcissism is not a modern invention. Now, I'm sure in many ways that Copernicus' story and the widespread understanding of his heliocentric model are far more complicated than what I can currently get into at the moment. What's significant about this story, for our purposes, is to show you a point in time where it was abnormal to be objectively correct about the state of our universe and thereby our existence. Copernicus, an established astronomer in a period of time that, likewise to ours, had social, legal, and technological standards, discovered something revolutionary about our world, our society, and our universe. And as a result, he was flagrantly punished. Well, not necessarily Copernicus, because he actually died before the church could punish him. But when Galileo went to carry the flame for Copernicus and the heliocentric model, he was put under lifelong house arrest and censored by the church. Mind you, this was only about 400 years ago in the 17th century, which again creates a fundamental difference between you, the person watching this video, and what was considered a normal belief for the bulk of the human experience. Not only that, but this was apparently such a radical thought. The notion that the sun was in the center of our solar system was so radical that Galileo needed to be put under lifelong house arrest and censored. Crazy. Luckily, we don't do that today. The heliocentric model of the solar system is an incredibly important breakthrough in the realms of physics and astronomy, and it's a breakthrough that if we didn't have, we would be living in a vastly different world. One likely that wouldn't have satellites or rocket ships, and what's notable is that nobody at the time of Copernicus or Galileo really would have understood the incredible implications that this discovery would have on the world one day. For most of the people who were living during the time of Galileo and Copernicus, they likely already understood enough about how the world and the sun moved in relationship to one another to understand seasons, to understand when best to plant things crop-wise, how day and night cycles work. By and large, it's not necessarily important for everybody during the time of Copernicus and Galileo that our understanding of these phenomenon shift from what is normally considered during that time to be the standard belief, which is that the Earth is in the center of the universe. There are a lot of mathematical models that, did their best to try to make this a provable reality, and in that respect, a lot of the people who were working during that time period wouldn't necessarily have lived any different lives than if the sun was either in the center of the solar system or whether Earth was. But this discovery ends up having enormous ramifications and implications for the coming centuries in challenging this notion of how the world works, in challenging the idea that the Earth is at the center of the solar system. Galileo ends up getting himself involved with a conflict with one of the largest institutional powers at that time, which is the Catholic Church. So when Galileo ends up proposing this new model of the universe, this new understanding is not going to be so significant that the peasantry and the regular people of that time period would necessarily have a lot of interest in defending this new version of our understanding about the universe. In raising this challenge to the Catholic Church, Galileo not only ends up challenging the church, but he also ends up challenging God himself. So what really is the biggest important thing to look at least in regards to this argument, this video, and this moment in time, is the fact that Galileo's discovery and Copernicus's discovery, while, again, not completely changing society overnight, do exist as a legitimate threat to papal and religious authorities of the time period. Let's remind ourselves it's a sin to be a heretic, and heretical thinking, if spread, could result in your immortal soul and the immortal soul of your family being sent to HE double hockey sticks. Maybe that's not how you see the world around you, but that's very much the standard position of the church of yesteryear. As our understanding of material reality began to mature during the period of Enlightenment, we see similar backlashes from spiritual authorities to a number of seismic breakthroughs. One particular discovery of note is Darwin's theory of evolution, which to this day continues to be a point of debate for people who don't understand scientific consensus. The morbidly ironic aspect of the Catholic Church demeaning science as heresy for not conforming with religious doctrine is that the origins of this same church are found in Jesus, a living embodiment of God who, due to his criticisms of the Roman government and his endeavors to uplift the impoverished masses, was called a heretic and crucified. In other words, it's totally normal human behavior, age after age, to punish those who have a good point. Let's bring this back to today, an era of human history where communication networks connect the entire globe. It's normal to drive to a fast food restaurant where it's normal for them to put fake food in a paper bag and hand it to you out of a window. A world where it's normal for one to go on vacation once or twice a year to an exotic location, and nobody will bat an eye if you travel using a big metal tube that flies. From that point, it would be normal to rent a car and spend 3 to 7 days walking around taking pictures of things so you could post them on your normal handful of online forums so people can predictably tell you how much fun your trip looked like when you return from the escape of your normal life. If that all sounds nice and good to you, that's natural. But it's not only natural, it's encouraged. People are attracted to these kinds of experience because they're fun. Beyond any social function, we can all agree that getting away, as it were, is enjoyable in and of itself. Yet within this pleasure, we must realize that it's merely the escape we long for. Let's think about Disney World, a place where thousands of people, like clockwork, show up, do their jobs, and go home. The location in and of itself is not a singular defining quality, right? Because people, regular people who work there show up every day, and for them, that's just a regular job. For them, it's exactly like your workplace at home. The place is not inherently what creates this sense of escape. In many ways, a trip to Disney continues to reinforce a number of regular consumer interactions and time demands present in your normal life. Yet, one is relieved by deshackling themselves from the responsibility of being a worker and the heightened reality that Disney presents. A news story I heard recently was about how people have been actually bankrupting themselves to go on a Disney vacation. In effect, the desire to deliver oneself or one's family from their everyday norm for some people is worth collapsing their finances. Scary. Despite the criticisms I'm about to levy at the modern relationship we have with work, I want to preface it by acknowledging that contemporary workers, by and large, are assisted in ways that are unimaginable to our forefathers or preceding generations. While these conditions brought about by technological innovations and several communication revolutions underpin our relationship to modern-day work, similar to Galileo's discovery, you're not necessarily going to think about these innovations or revolutions as you're typing up an email or picking up the company phone. There is nonetheless, across all spectrums of work, an appreciation for these advances. Think about how much more productive, for example, a modern farmer with a tractor and a modern irrigation system is going to be against a farmer without any of these innovations. Relative to earlier parts of human history, a modern worker with access to thousands of years of human development at the tip of their fingers is much more productive than a normal worker of a previous era. Yet here in America, despite the fact that worker productivity continues to increase year after year, the compensation for these workers has totally stagnated. Over this time period, it's also become normal for people who get a college degree to become a barista, for example. It's become normal for younger generations to move back into their childhood homes out of necessity. And most damningly of all, it's become normal for political and legal institutions to defend the right of the wealthy to abuse the needs of the poor. previous examples of normal things that happen in the 21st century is an interesting sort of phenomenon to look at when we're considering the fact that normalcy is an illusion. The parameters of this illusion shift from generation to generation. At one point, the normal thing to do was to be an amoeba. Then we evolved. At another point, it was normal to crucify Jesus. At another point, it was normal to censor somebody who said something undeniably true about the sun. And at another point, it's normal to drive a car, and who knows, maybe at some point, it'll be normal to live on Mars. What's notable about this illusion of normalcy is who constructs it and how it impacts the lives of the abnormal. For Galileo, it was a lifelong house arrest by the authority of the Catholic Church. For Jesus, it was crucifixion at the hands of the Roman imperial state. Both of these situations involve men introducing to society a better status quo who are then punished because of the threat posed to institutional powers of the time. Both men following their persecution are ultimately cherished by history as actors of bravery who are challenging the social norms of that era to introduce something better to society. In both instances, these actors are sort of to become representational of the weakness of either of these institutions. For the Roman institution, for example, Jesus, to a certain extent, signifies a major weakness in not being able to take care of its impoverished masses. For Galileo's example, he exists as a representational kind of symbol of the Catholic Church's weakness at embracing material science at the kind of turn of our understanding of how the world works. What's interesting about both instances is that the preachings of Jesus or the promotion of the heliocentric model will ultimately become normal in society. But inasmuch as the era of human history is unable to contend with these discoveries, they must be punished. What's especially notable about these particular examples of abnormality being punished by the predominant institutions of the time is how dangerous this is for human progress at large. It is perfectly normal for institutions throughout human history to, in many instances, threaten the entirety of human progress in order to protect the institution's own authority. The notion of normality from period to period, then, is necessary for the rich and powerful to maintain control even at the expense of the majority of the population. One particularly prescient example is the ostracization of leftist politics and socialist reform during the Red Scare of the 1950s. During this period of time, FDR's Great New Deal inoculated a struggling and potentially revolutionary public with just enough socialism to revive the country after the Great Depression. In this period of time, several conditions created a vibrant middle class in America, very much uplifted by government-funded work projects, as well as a much more organized middle class who are able to use labor unions as leverage to secure benefits that today are largely considered commonplace. Thus, it's through the collaboration of institutional powers and organized mass workers that America experienced what we now call the Golden Age of America. And yet, in spite of the collective prosperity that Americans began to enjoy, popular consensus was soon manipulated in order to reserve the institution of capital. Thus, if we are going to understand the way that concepts of standardized behavior affect our world today, we need to consider who are our institutions. similar to the Catholic Church in the day of Galileo or the Roman imperial state during the time of Jesus. That begs the question, what then do you think when you think of the institutional powers in America today, and how do you see their claim on normalcy? There are several forces that very much shape the way that we experience what's normal. Let's name a few, starting with fossil fuels company, who receive trillions of dollars in federal funding. And have you ever noticed how the layout of most American cities are designed for vehicles that necessitate the commodity of fossil fuels? Big tech is a more recent power that's been eating federal funds since at least the early 2000s. Millions, if not billions of dollars have been funneled their way, which have recently culminated in the widespread corporate required use of AI technologies, which actually threaten your jobs. Politicians are allowed to take unlimited amounts of money from anonymous donors while abusing the public by making promises they don't intend on keeping. Media conglomerates funded by a single pool of billionaires ultimately end up trading away their journalistic autonomy for the capital required to run the ship. A bloated military that uses excess funding as rationale for operations that are cruel and create instability abroad. These are just a handful of the forces that knowingly or unknowingly collaborate to shape your experience of what's normal. These institutions and those who lead them are extremely cognizant of their domination as well as the detriment that the imposition of this control has on you and the rest of the population. If this information were to be widely known and accepted, these institutions would crumble. And keep in mind, Galileo didn't destroy the Catholic Church with heliocentrism. Jesus didn't destroy Rome. But both people, in adjusting the status quo of their times, threatened those who were in control of these institutions. Thus, it's in these institutions' best interest to create conditions where individual conformity isn't questioned and the path to success is ultimately paved with standardized behavior. One preeminent modern American hero is a man named Jeff. He has a last name, but that's not important right now. What's important here is what Jeff represents and how he creates a version of success dependent on abusing people and how it's normalized. Jeff's private company is a shipping magnate-online market. It's a company that requires copious amounts of fossil fuels, has frequently been caught violating workers' rights, and has had a very negative impact on small businesses all over America. Yet, for many Americans, Jeff is an example of somebody doing things the right way, which becomes normalized. Jeff's primary value to American society was to make buying things off the internet more convenient. In this regards, Jeff was very successful. So, as most Americans come to see it, Jeff had a very good idea, a way to see it through, and he succeeded. Thus, he was rewarded with so much wealth, so an unfathomable amount of wealth. For a lot of Americans, the success story ends there. Yet, if you think like me, there are several elements missing from Jeff's success story. Jeff, for instance, is a complete failure to his employees, who he continues to overwork and underpay. Jeff is a failure in not holding his company accountable for the widespread pollution that all of his shipping costs, and not seeking an eco-friendly alternative. Jeff is a failure at growing hair, and as Jeff continues to accumulate billions of dollars, he ultimately shows a real flaw in character. This failure in character is one all billionaires share. Ultimately, in narcissistically hoarding their wealth, they don't realize the amount of work that the collective public has done in order to make sure that they're successful. Jeff's business doesn't exist without warehouse workers, dock workers, ship captains, cargo pilots, or van drivers to deliver the packages. Taylor's concerts, for example, don't run without dancers, truck drivers, gaffers, grips, electricians, technicians, or stage managers. Elon's rockets can't fly without an engineer smart enough to design it and builders competent enough to construct it. The profits that these people and companies enjoy are captured and then ultimately used throughout the decades to buy the correct politicians, which make it so that society doesn't tax these people fairly. Thus, it's become a normal situation for government officials who have been captured by these interests to get elected and then turn around and explain to you why it's your responsibility to bear the burden of their missing contributions. It's a result of our society's decision to normalize the poor treatment of the working class to uplift the excess of the owning class that creates an environment where the symbolic connection to status, wealth, or influence create a sense of normalcy and popularity amongst the public who are desperate to participate in such owning class activities. To explain what I mean about institutions creating these sorts of standards of success or normalcy or popularity, let us actually look at idealistically somebody who during Galileo's period of time on this planet would have wanted to understand more about the forces that shape the world around them. This person would likely be subjected to common beliefs and practices of the Catholic Church, and even if this person was compelled by Galileo's evidence-driven findings, assuming that the institution of the Church continues to, through the Pope or through this man's religious leader, tells this guy that it's heretical to believe that the sun is the center of our solar system. Here we have somebody who, even if he wanted to understand more about the world around him and the universe at large, this becomes impossible within what is socially acceptable during this period of time. Today, there are forces that are equally as controlling and manipulative as the Catholic Church. If we look at, for example, Jeff's company, then we'll see an institution where if you want to be able to continue to collect a wage, you have to basically forfeit any notion that you'll ever try to organize your coworkers in a way that would ensure their rights as laborers and possibly benefit you and your cohort in order to ensure that you can collect a paycheck. In much of the same way that the old church could deny you hypothetical access to heaven, modern-day institutions and corporate environments exist by and large as a way to control your behavior so that you don't do things that they don't want you to. This is what allows them to say what is right and what is wrong about any of their workers. For example, if a worker can't engage in a labor union, then that worker is going to have a much more difficult time securing rights and benefits for them and their coworkers, even though it's objectively good to participate in these sorts of structures. The risk posed by the system and the institution here is normally going to be enough to compel the average worker against organizing in any of these ways. So, at other points in human history, concepts like heaven may have been what was ultimately used to kind of police what was socially acceptable or normal to believe in. And nowadays, I would wager that the bulk of our beliefs about what is right or what is wrong is ultimately somewhat captured by these institutions of capital and by the ways in which that we're able to secure money for us to continue to survive. For many people, the idea of being a millionaire or a billionaire is going to be tempting enough to excuse any of the potential abuses that happen at the hands of their bosses or employers. And because it's so normal for Americans to idealize being one of these like super wealthy people, that's ultimately the psychological area wherein somebody can say, if you have a certain political belief, you're not likely to be very successful. This notion of success and this ideal of success that gets created has just as much power to manipulate the average American worker so that they continue to put up with the abuse that their employers rain out on them day in and day out. We are uniquely blessed to live in a time where we don't need to choose between our faith or our understanding of objective reality. I can say to you that the sun is the center of our solar system and nobody has to worry about house arrest. When I was a kid, I didn't realize it, but I could feel the sense that we were getting closer than ever to enjoying some kind of new status quo in an era of increased tolerance. But as I've watched America change, particularly between high school, college, and now several years into adulthood, I can't help but feel like we're at risk of backsliding. Our workers are less organized than ever, and there seems to be nobody incapable of power from preventing tech oligarchs who illegally harvest data or poison towns for these data collection facilities. There's also nobody who seems to be able to protect abused workers at billion-dollar corporations, and even aspects of social equality for various genders, sexualities, and races in recent years continues to feel increasingly at risk. So, in essence, despite the fact that we've grown so much as a human society, there's always this looming threat that will be dragged back into the Stone Ages to the point where, there are, again, people who will legitimately try to block dissemination of Darwin's theories, for example. There are people who will contend with the fact that the Earth isn't a globe. People are beginning to increasingly exhibit a tribalistic tendency that, for as much as I'm aware, has by and large been somewhat kneecapped in respect to the fact that as our society has grown, we've become a lot more accustomed to accepting people with other beliefs, accepting people with other backgrounds, and what's really scary at this point in time is the notion that I feel like we currently live in a kind of society where you could be anyone and normalcy gets to apply to you. Decency gets to apply to you by and large, right? But the world that we're increasingly wading into seems to want to challenge that proposition, which means that all of these institutions that we've been talking about throughout this video will begin to pick and choose who gets rewarded on base of their normal characteristics or behavior. Since the Second World War, our military budget has completely ballooned. This was in part to make sure that we had conventional weapons for defense, but it also helped fund underground intelligence networks that the CIA maintained throughout the European continent to prevent the rise of social democracies. Radio stations across Europe were secret U.S. operations designed to inspire and organize far-right militias. This is Operation Gladio. The ultimate intention of it was to install fascist leadership across the continent so that it was more convenient for the interests and ease of access of corporate America. Again, if you want to learn more about this network, look into Operation Gladio. It's in this series of events that we see a formula for social control. Confidential and deeply entrenched members of America's corporate and intelligence classes use their capital to hire mob members to commit shootings dressed as socialists, and used the pulpit to communicate to the masses that their left flank was the devil. This is not a conspiracy. This is a known operation, and this is all fact. And operations like Operation Gladio, hidden or exposed, continue to use manufactured outrage to alienate the underprivileged and abnormal while sweeping the crimes of the powerful under the rug. Just like in Operation Gladio, the rich and powerful don't want you realizing how much you have in common with people who are democratic socialists, for example. So they tamper with the evidence, and then their state-sanctioned media acts none the wiser, which allows everyone to watch fascists kill families only for socialists to get the blame. Sound familiar? Every single moment in history informs the moment to come next. And in this moment, I think that we currently find America grappling with a number of identity issues that are completely manufactured, ultimately to distract from the state of corporate control that threatens the autonomy of all of us in American society. At this moment, deep state actors are working to eliminate your freedom of privacy on the internet, and it's likely that we'll start seeing legislation that requires digital ID to become commonplace while browsing the internet. And if you'd like some more background on what I'm talking about, look up the debate going on about Section 230 or the COSA Act to find out for yourself what our legislators have in mind for the future of the internet. If this COSA Act passes, or if the legislative body of America is able to delete Section 230, this would represent a huge win for big tech, who will, at that moment, have up-to-date surveillance on your browsing history, and it would represent a massive amount of data which they can continue to sell at your expense. And soon, the very way that we interact with people on the internet will not be normal relative to the standards that we have right now. But this is all going to be sold by people who have been paid handsomely to totally ignore the insidious implications. Once broadcasted by your favorite influencers or talk show hosts or news anchors, if you don't question why the internet is going to start being policed that way, then they have done their job of creating a new normal in which they can continue to profit off of something that they don't deserve to profit off of, and at actual harm, potentially, to your person or the people around you. These developments are a large part of what informs the intent of this video, which aims to give you an option that isn't just blindly accepting what a bunch of people are going to start referring to as normal. The goals that are normal aren't real. The morals that are normal are paid for by monsters. And the people who want you to be normal normally mean that they want you to be amenable. These people need it to be normal to work too hard for too little. These people need it to be normal for your education to trap you in debt. These people need it to be normal for you to be more suspicious of your government than you are about the people who bought your government. People, by and large, consider positions defended by institutions to be what's normal. These impositions only work if you don't question what is established as normal around you. So, while you're living, don't forget to ask questions about everything you do every day. And a couple to start leading you along the direction is, why is it normal for America to have an incredibly limited public transport system? Why is it normal for Americans to go bankrupt while paying for medical bills? Why is it normal for people to blame marginalized groups while applauding the owner class who abuses them? Why is it normal for those who have the most to share the least? And I know that sometimes questions like this can make the world feel stacked against you. So if you're an individual watching this, unsure of what to do about the world around you and the way that it is continuing to reshape itself, take comfort in knowing that you aren't alone. If you're wondering what you should do, it's likely that to some extent you're already doing it. Don't be afraid to be off kilter. Don't think less of others for not conforming to what the world wants from them. And for a final thing, don't be afraid to say it with your chest. The sun is the center of our solar system. All right. Thank you for watching, everybody. If you made it this far, consider liking and subscribing. Did you enjoy this? And if you didn't, why not? Or if you did enjoy it, please leave any comments. Always greatly appreciated. Really helps the channel. This video, I don't know how it's gonna come out, but it really killed me. The video really killed me. At least the bulk of my Friday, it ate up and devoured, which is bad because I need that time for other things to do with the channel. So, I wanted to do this on a Thursday, but I had to do it on a Friday, and then midway through shooting, I had to sit in my car for an hour and a half because of New York's parking policy. But anyways, that's all just personal stuff. Again, thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and keep it weird.